Hey there, welcome to Shadow Archives. Just a heads up, there are a few ads in the first 10 minutes, then it's completely ad-free. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax or drift off to sleep. I hope you'll give this video a chance because I truly believe you won't find stories quite like these anywhere else. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. My great-aunt woke up in the middle of the night. She heard her dog making these low growls. That sound is what saved her life. At the time, she didn't know that yet. She was half asleep, lying in the dark, trying to understand why her dog sounded different than usual. He wasn't barking. He wasn't whining. It wasn't the kind of noise dogs make when they need to go outside or hear another animal. It was low and steady, deep in his chest, the kind of growl that means something is very wrong. My great-aunt was single then and living alone in her ranch-style home. It was a quiet place set back from the road, the kind of house where nights are usually still and peaceful. She had lived there long enough to know every sound the house made, the settling of the walls, the hum of appliances, the creak of the floorboards. This was not one of those familiar sounds. She sat up in bed and listened. The growling didn't stop. That alone made her uneasy. Her dog was usually calm at night. Protective, yes, but not reactive without a reason. He slept near her room and rarely made noise unless something truly caught his attention. The fact that he was growling in that low, controlled way told her he wasn't confused or startled. He was warning. She got out of bed slowly. The house was dark, lit only by faint light coming through the windows. She didn't turn on any lights right away. Something in her told her to stay quiet, to move carefully. She followed the sound of the growling toward the living room, her heart beating harder with every step. The dog was standing alert, body stiff, eyes focused towards the front of the house. She looked around. Nothing seemed out of place at first. No broken glass, no strange noises, no movement she could see. The silence felt heavy, but not immediately threatening. Still, her instincts told her not to ignore it. She decided to check the doors and windows. That decision mattered more than she could have known in that moment. She went to the front door first. It was locked. She checked the handle just to be sure. Solid, secure. That brought a small sense of relief, but it didn't fully calm her nerves. Next, she checked the first front window. Locked. Everything still looked normal, but the dog hadn't stopped growling. His body was tense, ears alert, eyes fixed on something she couldn't see yet. That alone kept her from dismissing the situation. Then she moved to the second window. It was covered by a mini blind, pulled down like always. She reached up and lifted it just enough to check the lock, expecting to see the same thing she had already seen twice. Instead, the window was wide open, and there was a man standing right there. He was so close to the glass that she could see him clearly despite the darkness. He was wearing a ski mask, his face completely covered except for his eyes and mouth. He wasn't crouching or hiding. He was standing there, waiting, like he knew exactly what he was doing. She froze. For a split second, her brain struggled to accept what her eyes were seeing. This wasn't a shadow. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was a real person outside her home in the middle of the night, with her window already open. Then he laughed. She later described it as an evil laugh, the kind that doesn't sound natural, the kind that feels intentional and cruel. It wasn't nervous, it wasn't uncertain, it was confident. Then he said two words that still make my stomach drop when I think about them. Party time, and he started to climb in. Everything happened fast after that. My great-aunt screamed. It wasn't a controlled scream. It wasn't a polite call for help. It was pure terror ripping out of her chest. She screamed that she had a gun. She screamed it as loud as she could, hoping the sound alone would scare him off. At the same time, her dog exploded into action. The growling turned into furious barking, loud and aggressive, echoing through the house. He lunged toward the window, teeth bared, fully ready to defend her. The sound of that dog barking changed the entire situation in seconds. The man hesitated. That pause mattered. He had been confident moments before, laughing, taunting. "I'm already climbing in." But now there was noise, chaos, a woman screaming, a dog that clearly wasn't bluffing. He backed away, then he ran. He bolted into the darkness and disappeared, leaving the window open and the night suddenly silent again, except for her shaking breaths and her dog's continued barking. It was over, but it was also not over at all. My great-aunt collapsed into a chair once she realized he was gone. Her whole body was shaking. Adrenaline crashed through her system, leaving her weak and nauseous. The dog stayed close, pacing, barking at the window for several minutes before finally calming down. She called the police. They came, took a report, checked the area, but the man was gone. There were no clear leads, no witnesses, no easy answers. Just the knowledge that someone had been there, watching, waiting, testing her home in the middle of the night. She didn't sleep much after that. Even once the sun came up, even once the house felt less threatening in daylight, the fear stayed. The sense of violation was overwhelming. Her home, the place she felt safest, had been breached without a single lock being broken. She kept thinking about how quietly he must have moved, how long he might have been standing there, how close she had come to something unthinkable. After that night, everything changed. She got a gun, not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of survival. She learned how to use it properly. She took safety seriously. She made sure she understood exactly what she was doing and why. It wasn't about feeling powerful. It was about never being that helpless again. She also changed how she lived. She double-checked locks every night. She installed better lighting. She paid attention to sounds in a way she never had before. She trusted her instincts instead of brushing them off. Most importantly, she never ignored her dog again. When I think about this story, that's what gets to me the most. The dog. If he hadn't growled, she might have slept through it. Or she might have walked into the living room without checking the windows first. Or she might have lifted the blind without any warning, giving that man exactly the surprise he wanted. Dogs notice things we don't. They hear what we can't. They sense intent, tension, movement in ways humans often miss. That dog didn't hesitate. He knew something was wrong and made sure she knew it too. I can't even think about what would have happened to her if she didn't have her dog to warn her. That thought is too heavy. A single woman, alone at night, a man already at her window, laughing, confident, willing to say something like party time while climbing into her home. That wasn't random, that wasn't harmless. That was someone who intended to do something terrible. The dog changed the outcome. Fear often gets dismissed when stories like this are told. People say things like, "You're lucky," or "At least nothing happened," without understanding that something did happen. A line was crossed. Safety was shattered. Trust in the world shifted permanently. My great-aunt carried that with her for the rest of her life. She never became paranoid, but she became aware. She understood that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits quietly outside your window, laughing. This story also changed how I think about prevention. People like to believe that danger comes with clear signs, that bad people look scary, that you'll always have time to react. That's not how it works. Sometimes danger is already there before you know it. Sometimes the only reason you survive is because something or someone alerts you in time. In her case, that someone had 4 legs. Every time I hear people dismiss dogs as just animals, I think about that night. About a dog who growled instead of sleeping. A dog who barked instead of freezing. A dog who stood between a woman and something horrific. That wasn't luck. That was loyalty. That was instinct. That was protection. My great-aunt lived a long life after that. She never forgot that night, but she didn't let it define her. She adapted. She learned. She took control where she could. And she always said the same thing when telling the story, that her dog saved her life. I believe her, because sometimes survival comes down to seconds, to instincts, to warnings we choose to listen to, and sometimes it comes down to a low growl in the dark that tells you something is very, very wrong. A few years ago, the exact day after I got my dog, my boyfriend decided to fly home for Christmas, leaving me alone in the apartment. At the time, it didn't feel like a big deal. He had family to see, plans already made, and I was excited about my new dog. I had only had him for 2 days. He was a small Jack Russell mix, not intimidating in size at all, but he had a bark that didn't match his body. It was loud, sharp, and deep enough that it sounded like it belonged to a much bigger dog. Nobody in my apartment building really knew he existed yet. I had been taking him out through the back entrance so we wouldn't have to deal with elevators or too many people while he adjusted. As far as anyone else was concerned, I lived alone. The morning after my boyfriend left, I was asleep when my dog started barking like crazy. It wasn't his normal bark. It wasn't playful or alert the mailman barking. It was frantic, non-stop, aggressive in a way that instantly snapped me awake. My heart jumped into my throat before my brain even caught up. I froze in bed for a second, listening. The barking didn't stop. It was coming from right outside my bedroom near the front door. That alone was enough to make my stomach drop. I lived alone. No one should have been there. My mind immediately started racing through possibilities, none of them good. I looked around my room for something, anything, that I could use to defend myself if I needed to. The only thing close enough was my skateboard. I grabbed it and held it the way you'd hold a club, like I might actually have to use it. My hands were shaking, but adrenaline was already taking over. I cracked my bedroom door open just slightly. I didn't want the dog to rush out. I didn't want to give up whatever barrier I still had. I just wanted to see what was happening. That's when I saw him. There was a big man standing in the middle of my apartment. Not near the doorway, not just inside the threshold. He was fully inside, several steps in, standing in my living room like he belonged there. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. It felt unreal, like my eyes were lying to me. My dog was losing his mind, barking and lunging, putting himself between me and this man without hesitation. The man looked at me and said casually, "My bad, wrong apartment." Then he turned around and left, just like that. The door closed behind him and the apartment went quiet, except for my dog still barking, still keyed up, still protecting me. I stood there frozen, skateboard raised, heart pounding so hard it hurt. It took me a moment to even breathe properly. At first, part of me tried to accept his explanation. Wrong apartment, accident, honest mistake. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. My apartment had a very obvious, very feminine setup. Girly color scheme, fake flowers everywhere. Ivy hanging from shelves and walls. Decorations that made it immediately clear who lived there. If someone opened the door and even glanced inside, they would know instantly that this wasn't their place. He didn't just open the door and peek, he walked in. He was literally halfway into my living room, several steps from the door. That means he had time to look around, time to register what the space looked like, time to notice that it wasn't his apartment. And still, he came in anyway. That's the part that still makes my skin crawl. I truly believe that if my dog hadn't been there, and if his bark hadn't sounded so big and aggressive, things would have gone very differently. If the apartment had been silent when he walked in, if he had thought I was alone and unprotected, if he hadn't been immediately confronted by something loud, unpredictable, and defensive. I don't know what his intentions were, and I don't think I want to know. All I know is that something stopped him. My dog stopped him. A small Jack Russell mix with a bark bigger than his body, who I had only owned for 2 days, changed the outcome of that moment completely. He didn't hesitate. He didn't freeze. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. After the door closed and I was sure the man was gone, my legs finally gave out. I sat down on the floor and hugged my dog while my whole body shook. The adrenaline drained all at once, leaving me dizzy and nauseous. I locked the door. Then I checked it again and again. That experience changed how I think about safety. Before that, I believed that danger was obvious, that it would announce itself loudly, that you'd have time to react, time to think, time to escape. That moment taught me how fast everything can happen, and how thin the line really is between normal life and something horrific. It also taught me something about animals. People sometimes dismiss small dogs, joke about them, act like they're useless for protection. But protection isn't always about size or strength. Sometimes it's about noise, about instinct, about making it clear that someone is not alone. That dog didn't just bark, he warned me. He scared someone away. He gave me the seconds I needed. I don't like thinking about what could have happened if he hadn't been there. That thought spirals too fast and too dark. What I focus on instead is this. I wasn't alone that morning, even though I thought I was. That dog saved me, and from that day on, I never underestimated him again. I lived next to a murderer. Faye Sweatlick was 6 years old when she was kidnapped out of her front yard. Those words still don't sit right in my head, even now. They feel too big, too heavy for something that happened so close to home. This wasn't a story on the news happening somewhere far away. This was my neighborhood, my townhouse complex, my street, a place that had always felt ordinary and safe in the way familiar places do. The day she disappeared, everything changed. At first, it was confusion. News broke quickly, spreading through phones and conversations faster than anyone could process. A child missing, taken from her own yard, the kind of thing you hear about and instinctively think, this can't be real, not here. But it was real. Within hours, my townhouse complex was overrun. News crews parked along the road. Cameras pointed at buildings I walked past every day. Police cars everywhere. Then the FBI, agents in jackets moving with purpose, knocking on doors, asking questions, taking notes. The normal sounds of daily life were replaced by sirens, radios, and hushed conversations. My fiancé and I were questioned 3 separate times by the FBI. 3 times. They searched our home thoroughly, opened closets, checked rooms, asked where we were, what we'd seen, who we'd spoken to. They weren't rude, but they were intense, focused. You could tell how serious it was. A child was missing and every second mattered. I remember feeling this strange mix of fear and responsibility. Fear because something horrible had clearly happened. Responsibility because when something like that happens near you, you start replaying everything in your head. Did I see anything strange? Did I miss something obvious? Did I walk past something that should have raised alarms? The complex felt different. People avoided eye contact. Doors stayed closed. Parents clutched their kids tighter. Everyone was watching everyone else without admitting it. Then came the moment I will never forget. I wasn't home at the time. My fiancée FaceTimed me, and the moment the call connected, I knew something was wrong. Her face was pale, her voice was tight. She turned the camera around so I could see. Police were digging through the trash cans directly in front of our townhouse. Not across the complex, not down the street, right there. Officers pulled out a trash bag and opened it. The scene didn't feel real, even through a phone screen. They reached inside and pulled out a small boot. a child's boot. Then they pulled out a bloody knife. I remember my stomach dropping so hard it felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. I just stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Part of me still hoped there was some explanation, some mistake, some reason this wasn't what it looked like. But there wasn't. Shortly after that, they found her body, dumped maybe 300 feet from my house. 300 feet. I've walked that distance countless times without thinking, taken trash out, gone for walks, lived my life completely unaware that something so horrific was unfolding that close to me. Knowing how near she was the entire time made my skin crawl in a way I still can't fully explain. The man who did it lived right next to us. He had watched them find the murder weapon. That detail still blows my mind. He stood there, knowing exactly what was in that trash bag, knowing what he had done, and watched as police pulled out the evidence piece by piece. And he was stupid enough to put it all in a trash bag with his own mail, his name, his address, everything tying it directly back to him. After they found the evidence, things moved fast. He went to his back porch, and he opened his own throat. That sentence feels unreal to type, even now. One moment the neighborhood was swarming with law enforcement, and the next, it was over in the most violent, final way possible. No trial, no answers, no explanations, just death, layered on top of death. The shock didn't come all at once. At first, it was disbelief, then horror, then a kind of numbness that settled in and stayed. I kept thinking about how normal he seemed. Or I had conversations with the guy, casual, everyday interactions, hellos, small talk, the kind of exchanges you don't even remember until you're forced to. I never knew he was a psycho. That's the part that haunts me the most. There were no warning signs I could point to now and say, there, that was it. He didn't act strange. He didn't seem dangerous. He blended in perfectly. Just another neighbor. Just another face you recognize but don't really know. That realization messed with my head more than anything else, because it shattered this belief that evil is obvious, that dangerous people look dangerous, that you can sense when someone is capable of something monstrous. I learned the hardest way possible that sometimes you can't. Sometimes people hide it so well that even living next to them doesn't reveal a thing. This all happened a year ago, and it still doesn't feel fully real. Sometimes I'll be doing something completely normal and the memory will hit me out of nowhere. The FaceTime call, the trash cans, the boot, the knife, the distance from my house to where she was found, the knowledge that I had spoken to the man who did it. It changes how you see your surroundings. My home used to feel like a safe bubble, separate from the horrors of the world. Now I know how thin that separation really is, how quickly normal life can be invaded by something unimaginable, how violence doesn't always come from strangers in dark alleys, but from people who live right next door. I think about her parents a lot. I think about what it must be like to live with that loss, to know your child was taken so close to home, to know how quickly everything happened. There's no way to make sense of that kind of pain. No way to balance it out or explain it away. I also think about how many people, like me, interacted with that man without ever knowing what he was capable of. How many smiles, nods, casual conversations happened before the worst possible truth came out. It makes the world feel less predictable. Not necessarily scarier all the time, but more fragile, more uncertain. You realize that safety isn't something you can ever fully guarantee. You can do everything right and still be standing right next to something horrific without knowing it. Living through that changed me. I pay attention differently now. I notice things I used to ignore. I don't assume familiarity equals safety. I don't take normal at face value anymore. And I carry a quiet awareness with me that didn't exist before. At the same time, I try not to let it consume me, because if you do, you stop living. But there's no denying that it left a mark. Knowing that a little girl's life ended so violently, so close to where I lived, at the hands of someone I casually knew, is something that doesn't fade. It stays. And every time I think about it, the same thought comes back. How close evil can be without you ever realizing it's there. The kidnapping of Colleen Stan. That story has a way of getting under your skin and staying there, not because it's flashy or mysterious, but because it is so painfully believable. It starts with ordinary decisions, with caution, with a young woman trying to do the right thing and still ending up trapped in something unimaginably cruel. Colleen Stan was hitchhiking in the 1970s. At that time, hitchhiking was far more common than it is now. It wasn't considered smart by everyone, but it also wasn't immediately seen as reckless. People did it to save money, to travel, to get from one place to another when options were limited. Still, Colleen was careful. That detail matters. She turned down rides. She didn't just jump into the first car that stopped. She paid attention to how people made her feel. If something seemed off, she said no. If a driver made her uncomfortable, she kept waiting. She trusted her instincts, and for a while, those instincts protected her. Then a van pulled up. Inside was a young couple and their baby. To Colleen, that felt safe. Families feel safe. A woman and a child signal normalcy, stability, non-threatening intentions. Everything about that situation went against the usual warning signs people are taught to watch for. So she accepted the ride. That decision changed the next 7 years of her life. Once she was inside the van, the illusion of safety disappeared almost immediately. She was held at gunpoint. There was no confusion, no misunderstanding. The people she had trusted revealed themselves in seconds, and there was no way out. They put a large box over her head. The box was designed to block out light and sound. It isolated her completely, cutting her off from the world in a way that was both physical and psychological. She couldn't see where she was going. She couldn't hear what was happening around her. She couldn't orient herself or understand distance or direction. That box became the beginning of how they erased her sense of reality. Later, things became even worse. They kept her in a box the size of a coffin underneath their bed. That fact alone is almost impossible to process. A human being confined in a space so small she could barely move, hidden beneath a bed in a normal-looking home. People slept above her. Life went on above her. Meanwhile, she existed in darkness, silence, and pain, reduced to something that could be concealed and ignored when convenient. She was brutally beaten and raped daily. There is no way to soften that without lying. The abuse was constant, systematic, and intentional. It wasn't random violence, it was control, it was punishment. It was meant to break her down piece by piece until there was nothing left to resist. But the physical abuse was only part of it. The psychological abuse may have been even more devastating. Her captor convinced her that they were part of a powerful organization called the Company. He told her it was a kind of mafia, with reach everywhere. He told her that if she tried to escape, if she told anyone what was happening, if she disobeyed, her family would be found and killed. He didn't just say it once, he repeated it constantly. He reinforced it with stories, with threats, with punishments. He made it part of her reality. Over time, that fear became internalized. It wasn't just something she heard, it was something she believed. This is what people often misunderstand about cases like this. They ask why she didn't run. They ask why she didn't scream. They ask why she didn't fight harder. They don't understand what 7 years of isolation, violence, and brainwashing does to a person's mind. Survival becomes about minimizing harm, not about escape. Hope becomes dangerous. Trusting your own thoughts becomes impossible when every thought has been shaped by fear. Colleen was allowed out of the box at times, but even then, she was never free. She was controlled through rules, through threats, through terror that extended beyond her own life. The idea that her family could be hurt kept her compliant in ways chains alone never could. She learned how to survive. That meant obeying. That meant enduring. That meant staying alive in whatever way was possible. Years passed, 7 of them. 7 years where the outside world kept moving. People grew older, seasons changed, technology shifted. Meanwhile, Colleen's life was frozen in trauma, repetition, and fear. She existed in a narrow space defined by pain and the constant effort not to be killed. The presence of the wife complicates the story in a way that makes it even harder to digest. The wife knew. She participated. She watched. She benefited from the arrangement in her own way, even as she lived a seemingly normal life. That duality is one of the most disturbing parts of the case. A household with a hidden victim, maintained through silence and complicity. Eventually something shifted. The wife helped Colleen escape. That moment did not come from sudden bravery or moral clarity in a simple sense. It came after years of living with what they had done, after witnessing the damage, after existing in the same house as a woman being destroyed piece by piece. The escape was not dramatic in the way people imagine rescues. There were no explosions, no heroic confrontation, just a narrow window of opportunity and a decision that should have been made years earlier. When Colleen finally got away, the truth came out. The case went to trial. The wife received immunity in exchange for testifying against her husband. That part is controversial, and understandably so. Many people struggle with the idea that someone who participated in such prolonged abuse could avoid prison. But without her testimony, it's possible the full truth would never have been revealed. Justice in cases like this is rarely clean or satisfying. The husband was convicted. The world finally learned what Colleen had endured. The case became known as the girl in the box. That name alone is haunting. It reduces 7 years of suffering into a single, horrifying image. A box, darkness, silence. A person hidden away beneath a bed, treated as an object instead of a human being. What makes this case especially terrifying is how it dismantles common ideas about safety. Colleen didn't make reckless choices. She didn't ignore obvious danger. She actively avoided rides that felt unsafe. The thing that trapped her was something most people are taught to trust. A family, a woman, a baby. It exposes a truth people don't like to sit with. Danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks harmless. Sometimes it looks familiar. Then sometimes it looks like exactly what you're told to trust. It also forces people to confront how powerful psychological control can be. Colleen's captivity wasn't maintained only by locks and boxes. It was maintained by fear planted so deeply that escape felt more dangerous than staying. Even after she was physically able to leave at certain points, mentally she was still imprisoned. That is not weakness. That is trauma. After her escape, Colleen had to learn how to live again, how to make decisions, how to trust her own thoughts, how to exist in a world that had continued without her. Survival doesn't end when captivity ends. In many ways, that's when the hardest part begins. The story leaves you with anger. Anger at the man who did this. Anger at the woman who allowed it to continue. Anger at how easily a life can be stolen. It also leaves you with a deep unease about how thin the line is between normal life and unimaginable horror. One decision, one ride, one moment where caution is overridden by something that feels safe. That's why this case still terrifies people decades later, not because it's unbelievable, but because it isn't. Because it shows how evil can hide inside ordinary spaces, how suffering can be concealed under a bed, how trust can be weaponized, how fear can be used to control someone long after physical restraints are no longer necessary. The Girl in the Box is not just a true crime story, it's a reminder of how fragile safety can be, how powerful manipulation is, and how much strength it takes to survive something that was never supposed to happen in the first place. And once you know what Colleen Stan endured, it's impossible to forget it. He was just 2 years old and with his mom running errands. It was an ordinary day, the kind that blends into memory because nothing about it feels special or dangerous. A quick stop at a store, a toddler walking beside his mother, small hand wrapped in hers, learning the world step by step. There was no reason to think this day would be any different from all the others that came before it. No warning, no sense that something irreversible was about to happen. For just a moment, she let go of his hand to pay the cashier. That moment is the part people return to over and over again, even though it's not the cause in any meaningful way. Parents do this every day. They reach for wallets, sign receipts, adjust bags, talk to clerks. A child standing right there 1 second is gone the next, not because of negligence, but because toddlers move fast and curiosity pulls them forward without fear. He wandered away, not far at first, just a few steps. Then more, a small child moving through a public space, unaware of danger, unaware of being seen. He didn't cry right away. He didn't know he was lost yet. To him, the world was still open and interesting, full of people and movement. 2 10-year-old boys spotted him. That sentence alone feels wrong. 10-year-old boys are supposed to be children themselves. They're supposed to be worried about school and games and getting home for dinner. They're not supposed to notice a toddler as an opportunity, but they did. Security footage later showed them watching children, not randomly, but deliberately. Looking, waiting, choosing. They lured him toward them. They didn't grab him violently at first. They didn't raise alarms. They approached him the way older kids sometimes do, the way that doesn't immediately trigger fear. They took him by the hands and led him away. To anyone watching briefly, it could look almost normal. Older brothers helping a younger sibling, family, something familiar enough not to stop. That's the part that's hardest to accept. Some people questioned the sight of 2 older boys walking with a crying toddler. Something about it didn't sit right with them. But when asked, the boys lied easily. They said he was their brother. They spoke with confidence. They didn't hesitate. And because they were children themselves, because people don't expect cruelty wrapped in youth, no one intervened further. The world moved on around them. They led him away from safety. As they walked, they took him farther and farther from crowded spaces. The farther they went, the quieter it became. The more isolated, the more dangerous. The toddler began to cry, confused and scared, not understanding why he couldn't go back to his mother, why the hands holding his felt wrong now. They pushed him, they kicked at him. The violence didn't start all at once, but it escalated steadily. There was no moment where they stopped to reconsider, no hesitation that mattered. This wasn't an accident or a sudden loss of control. It was intentional, it was sustained, it was cruel. They took him to a secluded location. What happened there is something many people can't bear to read in detail, and there's no need to recount it to understand the horror. The torture was prolonged and unimaginable. It was inflicted on a child who couldn't fight back, who didn't understand what was happening, who should never have encountered anything like this in his short life. Eventually, they killed him. Even after his death, the cruelty didn't stop. They didn't run for help. They didn't panic. They didn't confess. Instead, they tried to hide what they had done. They placed his body on some railroad tracks, hoping that a passing train would destroy the evidence and make it look like an accident, as if his life could be reduced to a tragic misunderstanding instead of what it truly was. He was found days later. A train had severed his body in half. The discovery shocked the country, not just because of the brutality, but because of who committed it. When the truth came out, it broke something deep in the public consciousness. People searched desperately for explanations. Bad parenting, a media influence, violent movies, broken homes, anything that could make sense of it. But there was no explanation that truly satisfied. The boys were caught. They became the youngest convicted murderers in British history. Watching the trial unfold felt surreal. 2 children sitting in a courtroom being described as capable of acts that most adults couldn't even imagine. Their faces looked young, their bodies small, but the evidence was undeniable. Security footage from the day James was taken showed them watching children, not wandering aimlessly, not playing, watching, studying, picking out a target. It was premeditated and intentional, not impulsive. The randomness of it made it even more terrifying. It wasn't personal, it wasn't provoked. It was simply opportunity meeting intent. They were sentenced, they were also protected. Their identities were sealed. Their names changed. Their safety prioritized because of their age. Eventually, they were released at 18, re-entering a world that would never forget what they had done, even if it wasn't allowed to know who they were. Years later, one of them returned to prison for possessing child abuse images on his computer. That detail hits like a punch to the stomach, not because it surprises people, but because it confirms a fear many already had, that something fundamentally broken didn't disappear with time or punishment, that the danger hadn't simply faded away. For many, the case never stopped being horrifying, but for parents, it takes on a different weight entirely. The most terrifying thing about this case for me is that my own son is only 2 now. That's where it stops being history and becomes personal. Suddenly, it's not a headline or a documentary or a case study. It's a mirror, a child the same age, the same vulnerability, the same innocent trust in the world. James's murderers were just children too. That's the part that refuses to settle in the mind. We're taught to be wary of adults, to watch for strangers, to teach our kids about bad people in a way that usually implies grown-ups. But this wasn't that. This danger wore the face of childhood. Children younger than my stepson were capable of this. That realization cracks something open that doesn't close easily. It forces a parent to confront a truth that feels unbearable, that evil doesn't always come from where we expect it, that age alone doesn't equal innocence, that the world is more complicated and more dangerous than we want it to be. The randomness of it is what haunts me the most. It wasn't targeted, it wasn't personal, it wasn't revenge or rage directed at a specific person. It was a child being in the wrong place for just a few minutes. A momentary lapse in attention that could happen to anyone. A parent doing something every parent does, every single day, and in that moment he became a target. That thought lingers in quiet moments. When your child wanders a few steps ahead, when your hand slips away for half a second, when you look down at your phone or reach for your wallet or answer a question, you start to imagine how quickly everything could unravel. Not because you failed, but because the world doesn't always protect the innocent. There's also the unbearable grief of his mother, trying to imagine what it would be like to realize your child is missing. The panic, the searching, the hope that builds and collapses again and again. And then the truth, the knowledge that his suffering was prolonged, that strangers had chances to stop it, that answers come too late to matter. No parent should have to carry that. The case forces people to ask questions they don't want to ask. Are some people born broken? Can cruelty exist without cause? What do we do with children who commit acts like this? Can they be rehabilitated? Should they be? There are no answers that feel right. Punishment feels inadequate. Mercy feels dangerous. Understanding feels impossible. And yet, the reality sits there, unmoving. This happened, it can happen again. Not often, but once is enough to change how people see the world forever. For me, everything about this case is horrifying. Not in a sensational way. Not in a way that feels distant or abstract. It's horrifying because it strips away comforting illusions. It tells us that vigilance is not paranoia, that fear can sometimes be rational, that love alone doesn't shield our children from harm. And still, we let them live. We let them explore. We let them walk beside us instead of clinging constantly to our legs. We let them trust the world because to do otherwise would crush them in a different way. Parenting becomes this impossible balance between protection and freedom, made heavier by stories like this that refuse to fade. I don't tell this story lightly. I don't revisit it often. But when I do, it's with a sense of quiet dread and deep sadness. For a child who should have grown up. For a mother who lost everything in minutes. For a society forced to confront the darkest edges of human behavior in the smallest bodies. It's terrifying to know that children can be capable of such things. It's even more terrifying to know that there's no foolproof way to prevent it. All we can do is hold our children close, stay aware, and hope that the world meets their innocence with kindness more often than cruelty. But this case stands as a reminder that sometimes horrifying things don't announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they look like kids, and sometimes they strike in the space of a single ordinary moment that no one ever expects to be the last safe one. Pardon the brief pause in our journey. If this is your first time listening, I'm glad you found us. If you want to keep these rainy nights and calm stories going, please subscribe to Shadow Archives. Think of it as keeping the lights low and the stories moving. Make sure to tap the bell so you never miss a moment of the dark. And now, let's return to where we left off. One of my best friends growing up had an aunt that was the sweetest, most generous woman you could possibly know. That isn't something people say lightly, and it isn't nostalgia exaggerating the truth. She really was that person, the kind of woman who noticed when someone was left out of a conversation and gently pulled them in. The kind who remembered birthdays without reminders and showed up with food when someone was sick, even if they barely knew each other. Kindness wasn't something she turned on or off. It was simply how she existed in the world. When I think about her, I don't remember big gestures first. I remember small ones. Her laugh, which was warm and easy. The way she listened when people talked, like what they were saying actually mattered. The way she gave without expecting anything back. She made people feel seen. And that kind of presence sticks with you, especially when you're young and still learning what good adults look like. She had been single for a while before she met him. She wasn't desperate or lonely in the way people sometimes assume. She had a full life, friends, family, routines, joy. But when she met this man, he seemed different in a way that felt promising. He was attentive at first. He complimented her kindness, told her how rare it was, how special she was. He said he loved the way she treated people. He said it made her different from everyone else. At the beginning, nothing seemed wrong. They started dating, and for the first month or so, things looked normal from the outside. He showed up. He said the right things. He made her feel chosen. People around her didn't notice red flags because there weren't obvious ones yet. If anything, he seemed almost too into her, too appreciative of who she was. At the time, that didn't feel dangerous. It felt flattering. What no one realized yet was that he wasn't admiring her kindness. He was claiming it. Slowly, his language began to change. He didn't say it outright at first. It came in comments that sounded like jokes or concern. He would ask why she spent so much time helping other people, why she smiled so easily at strangers, why she went out of her way to be nice when she didn't have to. At first, she brushed it off. Being kind was who she was. She had always been that way. She didn't see a reason to explain herself for it. But he didn't let it go. After about a month, his tone shifted. The comments turned into accusations. He told her she was too nice to other people, that she gave too much of herself away, that her kindness toward others made him feel disrespected. In his mind, affection and kindness were things that belonged to him now. He didn't see her as a whole person with her own values. He saw her as something he owned. To him, her kindness was not a character trait, it was a resource. And in his twisted thinking, it was a resource she was stealing from him by giving it to anyone else. When she smiled at neighbors, helped friends, or showed compassion to people who weren't him, he took it personally. He convinced himself that this was betrayal, that if she was kind to others, she was being unfaithful, that if she shared her warmth with the world, she was taking something away from him. This is the part that still makes my chest tighten when I think about it, because nothing she did changed. She didn't become cruel, but she didn't change her behavior. She didn't provoke him. She didn't deceive him. She remained exactly who she had been when he first claimed to love her, and that is what enraged him. One day, the situation escalated in a way no one saw coming. What started as an accusation turned into violence. He attacked her. The details are horrific, and even now I struggle to think about them without feeling sick. He beat her until she lost consciousness, and even then the violence did not stop. He killed her in a way that reflected his belief that he had a right to her goodness, her body, her life. He believed that by taking her life, he was reclaiming something he thought belonged to him. In his mind, her kindness toward others was such an unforgivable act that she deserved to die for it. He didn't kill her out of jealousy in the way people sometimes imagine. He killed her out of entitlement. That distinction matters. This wasn't a crime of sudden rage. It was the outcome of a belief system, a belief that love means ownership, that kindness is a currency, that being in a relationship means another person owes you everything they are, and nothing of themselves can exist outside of you. He believed that by being kind to people who weren't him, she may as well have been cheating with the entire town. That sentence alone is terrifying, because it shows how far removed from reality he was, how deeply distorted his thinking had become, how dangerous it is when someone sees another human being not as a person, but as property. She died for being exactly who she had always been. She died for the very thing he claimed to love about her in the beginning. That is the part that never leaves me. People often ask what warning signs were missed, what she could have done differently, what others could have done. But those questions come from a need to believe this kind of thing is preventable if you're careful enough. The truth is harder to accept. Sometimes people hide who they are until they believe they have control. Sometimes the danger doesn't come from what you do wrong, but from what you do right, from being kind, from being open, from being generous in a world where some people see generosity as weakness or theft. The aftermath shattered everyone who knew her. My friend was never the same after losing her aunt. There was grief, of course, but there was also confusion and fear. How do you reconcile the image of someone so gentle being killed in such a brutal way? How do you make sense of a world where kindness can be interpreted as betrayal? Her family struggled with guilt, even though they had no reason to. They replayed memories, conversations, moments where they wished they had said something or asked more questions. That's what trauma does. It convinces people they could have changed the outcome, even when the outcome was driven entirely by someone else's sickness. For me, the story planted a seed of fear that never fully went away. Not the kind of fear that makes you panic all the time, but the kind that quietly changes how you see people. It made me realize that there are individuals who don't just dislike kindness. They resent it. They feel threatened by it. They want to control it. contain it, or destroy it if it doesn't serve them. It made me understand that some people don't want love. They want possession. And when possession is threatened, even by something as innocent as kindness toward others, they respond with violence. What scares me most is how ordinary the beginning was. There was no dark alley, no stranger in the shadows, no obvious danger. It was a relationship that started the way many do, with compliments, attention, and affection. That's what makes stories like this so unsettling. The danger didn't announce itself loudly. It crept in slowly, disguised as concern and love. He didn't fall in love with her as a person. He fell in love with what he could take from her. And when he realized he couldn't own it all, he destroyed it. I think about her often, not about the way she died, but about the way she lived. About the countless small moments of kindness that probably changed people's lives in ways they'll never fully understand. About how unfair it is that someone like her was taken by someone so consumed by entitlement and control. I also think about how society talks about these kinds of crimes. They're often framed as acts of passion or jealousy, as if that makes them more understandable. But this wasn't passion, it was ideology. A belief that another person's goodness belonged exclusively to him. That belief still exists in the world. That's why this story terrifies me. Because it isn't just about one man. It's about a way of thinking that dehumanizes others. A way of thinking that sees love as ownership and kindness as a threat. A way of thinking that turns admiration into entitlement and entitlement into violence. She didn't do anything wrong. She didn't lead him on. She didn't change. She didn't provoke him. She was killed for being herself. And that truth sits heavy with me. It makes me angry. It makes me sad. It makes me deeply aware of how dangerous certain kinds of people can be. Not because they look evil, but because they believe they are justified. The fact that people like him exist is terrifying to me. Not because they are monsters in the dark, but because they walk among us, sometimes unnoticed, until they decide that someone's humanity is something they're entitled to take. And once you understand that, you never look at love, kindness, or safety the same way again. I grew up with a very mentally ill and abusive father. That sentence feels simple, but it carries years of fear, confusion, and pain inside it. When I was a kid, I didn't have words like abuse or mental illness. I only knew that home never felt safe, and that my father's moods controlled everything. Some days he was quiet and distant. Other days he was angry in a way that filled the entire house, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My younger brother and I learned early how to read the air. We learned how to tell when it was better to stay silent, when it was better to disappear into our rooms, when it was better not to ask questions. We learned how to make ourselves small. We learned that normal rules didn't apply in our house, and that what happened behind our doors was not something you talked about outside of them. The summer I was 16 and my younger brother was 13 is the summer everything crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. Even now, when I think back on it, that time feels unreal, like something that happened to someone else. But it didn't. It happened to us. It happened in our home, in a place that was already full of fear, and it shattered whatever fragile sense of normalcy we had left. That day started like so many others. Nothing about it felt special or dangerous. There was no warning sign big enough to tell us what was coming. That's one of the hardest parts to accept. Violence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits until you let your guard down just a little. My father shot my brother with a shotgun in our basement. Writing that sentence still feels wrong. It doesn't feel like something that should exist in reality, let alone in my life. A father shooting his own child at almost point-blank range is not something the mind wants to accept. But that is exactly what happened. It happened fast. There was no dramatic buildup like in movies, no long argument that everyone remembers clearly. Just a moment where everything went wrong in the most extreme way possible. A shotgun, a child, a basement, the sound, the force, the immediate, overwhelming chaos. The blast missed my brother's heart by 2 inches. 2 inches. That number has followed me for the rest of my life. 2 inches is nothing. It's the width of a couple of fingers, the space between living and dying. The difference between my brother being here today and being buried as a teenager. He survived. Physically, at least. At the time, I wasn't there when it happened. That fact used to haunt me in a different way. I came home later that evening, unaware that anything had changed. Unaware that my life had just split into a before and an after. When I walked into the house, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Blood has a smell that doesn't compare to anything else. It's metallic and sharp and wrong. Even when it's been cleaned, it lingers. It clings to the air and seeps into your memory. I didn't understand what I was smelling at first, but my body did. My stomach dropped before my mind caught up. Then I saw my stepmother. She was on her hands and knees, cleaning blood off the tile floor in the basement. She was scrubbing like it was just another mess, like someone had spilled a drink, like nothing important had happened. There was so much blood, and yet she acted like there was nothing to see. No panic, no urgency, no horror, just quiet, methodical cleaning. The kind of cleaning you do when you want to erase something, not just remove dirt. The kind of cleaning that says, this must not be spoken about. That image is burned into my brain. I remember standing there, frozen, trying to understand what I was looking at. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My thoughts felt slow and disconnected, like they were floating instead of forming properly. I asked what happened. The answer I got didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Words like accident were used. Calm voices, controlled explanations. Like this was something minor that had gotten blown out of proportion. My brother was alive. But he was injured in ways no child should ever be injured. He was in pain. He was terrified. He had just been shot by the person who was supposed to protect him. And yet, the house felt like it was pretending nothing had happened. That was the most terrifying and surreal thing I've ever experienced. Not just the violence itself, but the way it was immediately covered up. The way reality was bent and rewritten in front of my eyes. The way adults who were supposed to keep us safe chose silence and denial instead. You would think attempted murder would be enough to terminate custody rights. You would think that a father shooting his child with a shotgun would trigger immediate consequences. Arrests, protection, removal, justice. But that's not what happened. The police were called, statements were taken, questions were asked, and then, somehow it was chalked up to an accident. An accident. That word still makes my hands shake when I think about it. There was nothing accidental about a shotgun being fired at almost point-blank range. There was nothing accidental about the environment we lived in, the fear we carried every day, the history of abuse that had already shaped our lives. But none of that mattered in that moment. My brother and I were too frightened of our father to say otherwise. That fear was real and overwhelming. It wasn't just fear of being yelled at or punished. It was fear for our lives. Fear of what would happen if we spoke the truth and were forced to go back into that house with him afterward. Fear of retaliation. Fear of not being believed. Children in abusive homes learn quickly that telling the truth can make things worse. So we stayed quiet. We nodded when adults spoke. We went along with the story. And just like that, the system failed us completely. Life continued, but it was never the same. After that, every day felt like borrowed time. Every sound in the house made my body tense. Every interaction with my father felt like walking on broken glass. The knowledge that he had crossed that line, that he was capable of that level of violence, changed everything. My brother carried not just physical injuries, but a fear that lived in his body. Loud noises made him jump. Sudden movements sent him into panic. Sleep was difficult. Trust was impossible. And still, we stayed. Not because we wanted to, but because we were trapped. At 18 and 15, respectively, my brother and I packed up and left the state. We didn't make a big announcement. We didn't have a dramatic confrontation. We just left. We took what we could carry and walked away from everything we had ever known. There was fear in that too, but it was a different kind of fear. A fear mixed with hope, a fear that at least pointed toward freedom. We never spoke to our father again. That decision was not easy, but it was necessary. Cutting off a parent, even an abusive one, comes with its own grief. You grieve the parent you never had. You grieve the idea of a normal family. You grieve what should have been. But staying would have destroyed us. To this day, little bits of shrapnel still surface in my brother's chest. That detail is one of the most haunting parts of this story. The injury didn't end when the bleeding stopped. His body still carries the evidence of what happened. Tiny fragments work their way to the surface over time. Reminders that the past is never as far away as you want it to be. Every time that happens, it brings everything back. The basement, the blood, the cleaning, the silence, the fear. Healing has been a long and complicated process for both of us. Trauma like that doesn't disappear just because you leave the place where it happened. It follows you. It shows up in unexpected ways, in relationships, in reactions, in the way your body responds to stress. For a long time, I struggled with anger. Anger at my father, anger at my stepmother, anger at the police, anger at a system that looked at a bleeding child and decided it was easier to call it an accident. I also struggled with guilt. Guilt for not being there when it happened. Guilt for staying quiet. Guilt for surviving when things could have been so much worse. Those feelings don't make a logical sense, but trauma doesn't care about logic. What has helped the most over time is understanding that we were children. We did what we had to do to survive. Silence wasn't a choice made out of weakness. It was a choice made out of fear, and fear was justified. Leaving wasn't running away. It was self-preservation. I don't share this story often. It's not something that comes up in casual conversation. It's not something people know how to respond to. Sometimes when you tell the truth about things like this, people get uncomfortable. They don't know what to say, so they say nothing, or they try to minimize it, or they change the subject. But every now and then, sharing it feels important, not for sympathy, but because these things happen and they often stay hidden. Families cover them up. Systems fail. Children grow up carrying wounds no one else can see, and silence protects the wrong people far too often. My brother is alive. That is the part I hold on to. He survived something that should have killed him. He built a life despite what he went through. He carries scars, both visible and invisible, but he is still here, and so am I. We escaped. We chose ourselves. We broke a cycle that could have continued indefinitely if we had stayed. To this day, when I think about that summer, about that basement, about that blood on the tile, I still feel a chill run through me. Some memories never lose their power. They don't fade into stories you tell lightly. They stay sharp, precise, and heavy, but they don't define us anymore. They are part of our history, not our future. I served a short stint as a fireman. It wasn't a long career, but it was long enough to change how I see the world. People sometimes think you need years in emergency services to be affected, but that's not true. Sometimes one call is enough. Sometimes one morning rewires you permanently. This happened early in my shift, maybe 30 minutes after I'd clocked in. The day had just started. Coffee hadn't even settled yet. Gear was still clean. The station was quiet in that early morning way where the city feels paused for a moment before it wakes up fully. Then the call came in. RTA road traffic accident. Those words always carry weight, but you never know what kind until you get there. Could be a fender bender, could be a fatal. You prepare for the worst and hope for the best every single time. We rolled out quickly. When we arrived on scene, it was clear this wasn't minor. A car had been T-boned hard on the passenger side. The damage was severe. Metal folded in on itself, glass everywhere, debris scattered across the road. It was the kind of impact that makes your stomach sink before you even step out of the truck. The driver was already outside the vehicle. That stood out immediately. He was standing near the car, not restrained, not panicked, not injured in any obvious way. He looked shaken but upright, talking, moving. He didn't appear to be in pain. That alone was unusual given the state of the vehicle. The car had been hit when he ran a red light. Later, we learned he had been driving home after a night of heavy drinking. At the time, all we knew was that he'd been hit square on the passenger side. The force of the impact had collapsed the door inward, crushing everything in its path. His wife was still inside. She was seated in the passenger seat when we arrived. From the driver's side, she looked almost normal at first glance. That's one of the things that still messes with me. If you didn't know what had happened, if you didn't understand trauma, you might think she was just unconscious. Her lower body was still upright in the passenger seat. Her upper torso had fallen sideways toward the driver's side, slumped over like she was reaching across the center console. Her head rested near the driver's seat. Her arm was angled awkwardly, but not in a way that immediately screamed fatal injury. There was no visible blood from where we were standing. That matters more than people realize. Blood is usually what prepares you mentally. It tells your brain what you're dealing with. In this case, from the driver's side, there was none. No obvious trauma, no gore, just a woman who looked like she had passed out mid-movement. The passenger door, however, was caved in badly. That was the real story. The metal had folded inward, deep into the cabin. You could see how much force had gone directly into her side. The space where her body should have had room simply didn't exist anymore. The driver was still tipsy. That became obvious almost immediately. His speech was loose. His movements were uncoordinated. He was laughing inappropriately, fumbling around, joking with the police. He didn't seem to understand the severity of the situation at all. He kept asking us to hurry up. "Hurry up and get her out," he said more than once. "We just need to get home," he kept repeating. A home. He was convinced this was just an inconvenience, a delay, a problem that needed to be fixed quickly so life could continue. He genuinely believed his wife was just unconscious and that we were wasting time. That disconnect was chilling. While police handled him, we focused on her. Paramedics tried to assess her vitals, but access was limited. From the driver's side, they checked what they could. There was no response, no reaction to stimuli, no pulse. That's when we decided to extract her from the driver's side. As we began working, the truth revealed itself. Her lower left body was completely crushed. From her left pelvis down through her thigh, the damage was catastrophic. The passenger door had been driven so far inward that it had destroyed everything in its path. Worse, a piece of the door had impaled her through the left side of her abdomen. That's why there was no blood visible from the driver's side. She had bled out internally. She was gone within minutes of impact, probably instantly or close enough that it didn't matter. The moment we realized the full extent of her injuries, the tone shifted. Quietly, professionally. There's a way emergency crews move when hope disappears. It's subtle, but it's there. Everything becomes slower, more deliberate, more careful. Now we had to tell him. That responsibility fell to the paramedics and police, but we were close enough to see it happen. They told him his wife had died. At first, he laughed. Not a big laugh. More like a confused chuckle. The kind you make when you think someone is joking badly. "Stop kidding me," his face said before his mouth did. You could see the disbelief settle in. Then the disbelief cracked. Then it shattered. His expression changed in stages, clear and visible. Confusion, denial, then understanding creeping in despite his resistance, and finally, pure desperation. It was like watching someone sober up in seconds. The alcohol fog lifted instantly. Reality slammed into him hard. He ran to the driver's side of the car. Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed her upper body and tried to pull her toward him. He was screaming her name now, begging her to wake up, telling her they needed to go home. That movement tore her wounds further. We had to physically pull him away. Dragging someone away from a loved one is one of the hardest things you can do, even when you know it's necessary. He fought us not violently, but desperately. He was sobbing, shouting, losing control completely. Then he ran to the passenger side. He started trying to pry the caved-in door open with his hands. Bent metal, sharp edges. Blood he couldn't see, but was very much there. He was hurting himself, but he didn't care. He just wanted her out, wanted to undo what had happened. Police restrained him. At that point, our job was done. There was nothing more we could do for her. We left the scene and let the police handle the aftermath. That's another thing people don't understand. Emergency crews don't stay for closure. You don't get to see the end of the story. You do what you can, and then you leave. The scene becomes someone else's responsibility. We went back to the station. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. No one joked much after that. No one talked loudly. Everyone moved a little slower. Someone made coffee that nobody really drank. I saw it on the news that afternoon. The report was short, clinical. A drunk driver ran a red light. Passenger killed. Driver arrested. Charges pending. A tragedy. It didn't mention her posture in the seat. It didn't mention how she looked like she was just reaching over. It didn't mention how close he was to her, talking and laughing, while she was already dead. It didn't mention the sound he made when it finally hit him. That call never left me. Not because it was the most graphic thing I ever saw, but because of how deceptive it was. How easily the truth hid behind a normal appearance. How quickly a life ended while another one walked around, joking, unaware. It also burned something into me about drunk driving. People talk about it like it's abstract, like it's a statistic, like it only hurts the driver. But I watched a man kill his wife without realizing it, and then realize it all at once. That moment of realization is something I hope I never witness again. The way his world collapsed in seconds. The way there was no undo button. The way being fine physically meant nothing compared to what he had done. I only served a short time as a fireman, but that morning, 30 minutes into my shift, taught me more about life, death, and consequence than any training ever could. Some images don't fade. Some moments don't soften with time. They just stay, quiet, heavy, waiting for the smallest reminder to bring them back. A woman who went to my regular pub was out with her friend during the day. That's how the memory always starts for me. Ordinary, familiar, the kind of detail that shouldn't matter, except that it does because it places her firmly in the world of normal life before everything went wrong. She wasn't doing anything reckless or unusual. She was just out, enjoying her day the way people do. I saw her that day. That fact has never stopped echoing in my head. Later that evening, she missed a bus home. It's such a small thing. A delay, bad timing. One of those moments that usually leads to nothing more than mild annoyance or an extra drink while you wait. Instead of going straight home, she ended up in another pub. She was a little tipsy, but not falling over drunk. Just loose, relaxed, social. the way people often are when they feel safe in familiar surroundings. She met a man there. He lived with another man. From the outside, nothing about the situation screamed danger. Plenty of people go home with someone after a night out. Plenty of people trust that they'll be okay. She trusted the wrong people. The two men had an obsession with serial killers. That detail still makes my stomach turn because it reframes everything. What was to her a normal human interaction was to them something else entirely. Not connection, not attraction, something darker, something planned, or at least welcomed, in a way that should never exist. They murdered her, and even writing that feels unreal, because murder is a word that doesn't capture what they did next. After they killed her, they chopped her body up. And not in a moment of panic or desperation, but with enough detachment to continue living their lives afterward. They spent the next week putting her body into plastic bags and hiding them in bushes and different places, scattering her remains like she was something disposable. A person reduced to bags, a life reduced to evidence. They were caught pretty quickly, thankfully. There wasn't a long, drawn-out mystery or years of not knowing. They're both in prison for life. That fact brings some measure of relief, but it doesn't undo anything. It doesn't soften what happened or make it easier to carry. What haunts me most is how close I was to her last normal moments. The day she went missing, I saw her in the pub with her friend. It wasn't a dramatic interaction. It wasn't meaningful in the way you recognize at the time. It was just life happening. We stood in the smoking area together at one point, laughing about a pigeon that was just hanging around like it owned the place. That's what makes it hurt. We weren't talking about anything deep. We weren't having a serious conversation. We were laughing at something stupid and harmless, the way people do when they're relaxed and present. She was alive. She was herself. She was unaware of what was coming. I have a video from that day. She's in it. She makes a joke, just hours before her death. Sometimes I can't bring myself to watch it. Sometimes I do, even though it hurts, because it proves she existed the way I remember her, laughing, talking, being a person, not a headline or a victim. That video freezes her in time at a moment where nothing was wrong yet, and that contrast is brutal. I think about her nearly every day, not constantly, not in a way that stops me from functioning, but she's there in the background of my thoughts. She pops up when I'm at the pub, when I miss a bus, when I laugh with a stranger, when I think about how quickly nights can turn. It's a strange kind of trauma. I wasn't related to her. I wasn't her closest friend. I wasn't there when it happened. And yet, the knowledge that I shared space and laughter with someone just before their life ended so violently has changed something in me. It makes the world feel thinner, like the barrier between normal and catastrophic is far more fragile than we like to believe. She did not deserve such a cruel ending to her life. That sentence feels obvious, but it still needs to be said. She didn't provoke it. She didn't cause it. She didn't make a mistake that justifies what happened to her. She trusted people who should never have been trusted, but trust itself is not a crime. What happened to her wasn't the result of bad luck or poor judgment alone. It was the result of two people choosing to act on something monstrous inside them. I think about how casually evil can move through the world. Two men with an obsession, a woman who missed a bus, a pub she'd never planned to go to, a decision made in minutes that ended her entire life. The randomness of it all is terrifying in a quiet way. Not loud or cinematic, just deeply unsettling. Sometimes when I'm in that same smoking area, I catch myself glancing around, half expecting to see her there again, laughing, making another joke, existing, and for a split second it feels possible, like the past could overlap with the present if I just look hard enough. Then reality settles back in. I think about her family sometimes, even though I never knew them. I think about what it must be like to know that someone you love was alive and laughing, and then suddenly gone in a way that's almost too cruel to comprehend. There are no words that fix that, no sentences that soften it. What stays with me most is how human her last day was. Drinks with a friend, a missed bus, laughter over something stupid, a joke caught on video. None of it marked as special or important at the time. All of it priceless now. That's why it's traumatizing in its own quiet way, because it reminds me that life doesn't give warnings. It doesn't pause to let you know when a moment is about to become the last normal one. But sometimes you only realize it in hindsight when it's already too late. I don't tell this story for shock. I tell it because she mattered, because she was more than what was done to her, because remembering her laughing about a pigeon feels like a small way of pushing back against the brutality of how her life ended, and because thinking about her, even painfully, feels better than letting her be forgotten as just another horrible story. She deserved to live. She deserved to go home safely. She deserved a future. Instead, all that's left are memories, a video, a joke, and the weight of knowing how cruel the world can be when the wrong people cross your path. I carry that with me now, not as fear that controls my life, but as an awareness that stays close, a reminder to be gentle, to be present, to remember that the people around us are living entire lives that can be taken away far too easily. And every time I think of her, I hope that somewhere beyond all of this, she's more than the ending she was given. The New London School Explosion. A school in Texas in 1937 tried to tap into natural gas on their own, and it ended up leaking and blowing up the school. Even reading that sentence feels unreal, like something that shouldn't be possible, especially when you remember that this was a school, a place meant for children, a place that parents trusted every single day. It happened in New London, Texas, during the afternoon of March 18, 1937. The school was large and modern for its time. Hundreds of students were inside, along with teachers and staff. There was also a PTA meeting happening that day. So many parents were in the building too. It wasn't an empty or quiet school. It was full of life. The school had tried to save money by tapping into natural gas themselves, instead of using commercial fuel. What no one realized was that gas had been leaking into a crawl space beneath the building. Natural gas at the time had no smell, no warning, no sign. It collected silently, invisibly, waiting. Then something sparked. The explosion was massive. The entire school collapsed in seconds. Walls, floors, and ceilings were blown apart. Concrete slabs fell like paper. Classrooms disappeared. People nearby thought it was an earthquake. Others thought it was a bomb. The sound was heard miles away. By the time the dust settled, the school was gone. More than 290 people were killed, most of them children. Hundreds more were injured. Entire families were destroyed in a single moment. It remains one of the deadliest school disasters in American history. What shocks me is that I never heard about this in school. This feels like something that should be taught, not to scare kids, but to explain why safety rules exist, why gas is scented, why shortcuts can be deadly. In fact, this disaster is the reason natural gas is now scented in Texas and eventually across the United States. That horrible smell gas has, it exists because of New London, because children died without warning. I read survivor stories and I had nightmares, real nightmares, not because of explosions or fire, but because of the human details, the moments frozen in time, the way normal life was suddenly interrupted and never resumed. 3 stories in particular stayed with me and still haunt me. One was about a little girl, around 7 or 8 years old. She survived the blast and managed to crawl through the rubble. While looking for help, she saw her best friend and playmate trapped under a slab of concrete. Her entire body was crushed. Only her shoulders and head were visible. She was dead. But what made the image unbearable was that she still had a lollipop in her mouth, like she hadn't even had time to react. Like 1 second she was a child enjoying candy, and the next second everything ended. That detail hurts more than any statistic ever could. It captures how sudden and unfair it all was. Another story was from a teenage boy, around 16 or 17. He survived and immediately began helping with rescue efforts. There were no trained teams at first, just students, parents, teachers, and townspeople digging with their hands, pulling people out, carrying bodies away. He described seeing a father sitting in the wreckage, holding his daughter. The man was crying uncontrollably, rocking back and forth. At first glance, it looked like he was comforting her. Then the boy noticed the back of the girl's head was crushed open. Her brain was on the ground next to her. The father either didn't realize or couldn't accept what he was holding. He was clinging to her, begging her to wake up, surrounded by chaos and dust and death. That image alone is enough to break someone forever. The third story was about a young girl, around 9 years old. After the explosion, she went looking for her mother. The PTA meeting meant many parents were on site, and the area was filled with adults screaming, crying, and searching for their children. Her mother was there too, frantic and hysterical, calling out her daughter's name. The girl found her. She walked up to her own mother and called out to her, but her mother didn't recognize her. The girl was covered in blood, ash, dust, and tears. Her clothes were torn. Her face was blackened and swollen. Her hair was matted. She didn't look like herself anymore. Her mother pushed her away, shouting, "You're not my daughter." The girl kept trying. She kept calling her mom's name. She kept saying who she was. But her mother couldn't see past the horror in front of her. She was so consumed by fear and grief that she couldn't recognize her own child standing right there. Eventually, someone else intervened and helped reunite them. But that moment, that confusion, that rejection is heartbreaking beyond words. A child survives something unimaginable, only to be unrecognized by the person she needs most. This wasn't just a disaster. It was thousands of individual tragedies happening at once. Children buried under their desks, teachers killed while trying to protect students, parents crushed while attending a school meeting, siblings searching for each other in rubble that still smelled of gas and dust and death. It changed Texas forever. Afterward, laws were passed immediately. Natural gas was required to have an odor added so leaks could be detected. School construction standards changed. Safety regulations were rewritten in blood. But the people didn't forget. Survivors carried that day with them for the rest of their lives. Many never spoke about it again. Others couldn't stop talking about it. Entire towns were left with empty chairs at dinner tables and classrooms that would never be filled again. What makes it even worse is that it was preventable. There was no enemy, no storm, no act of violence, just a cost-saving decision, a lack of regulation, and a gas that gave no warning before it killed hundreds. That's why reading about it is so disturbing. It's not just the scale of death, it's the randomness, the normalcy of the day, the fact that kids were sitting in class thinking about homework or recess, completely unaware that the building beneath them was filling with something deadly. It reminds you how fragile everything is, how quickly ordinary life can turn into absolute horror, and how many safety rules we take for granted today exist only because something like this happened first. The New London school explosion should never be forgotten, not because of fear, but because remembering it honors the people who died and reminds us why warnings, smells, regulations, and rules exist in the first place. It was truly horrifying, and the fact that so many people have never even heard of it somehow makes it even worse. everything to do with Hajj Mohammed Mesfewi. That name carries a particular weight. Even now, more than a century later, it does not belong to legend or folklore, but to history, recorded and witnessed by people who lived through it. The details are not exaggerated by time. If anything, they are made heavier by the knowledge that this all truly happened, in a real place to real people, and was accepted by society as justice. Hajj Mohammed Mesfewi was a shoemaker who lived in Morocco in the late 19th and early 20th century. On the surface, his life appeared ordinary. He worked with leather and tools, repairing shoes, crafting soles, dealing with customers every day. His shop was part of the daily rhythm of the city, a place people passed without a second thought. Young women came and went. Neighbors recognized his face. Nothing about him openly suggested horror. But behind the ordinary routine was something deeply wrong. Mesfewi did not work alone. He had an accomplice, an elderly woman named Anna, around 70 years old. She was familiar, unthreatening, someone who could easily gain trust. Together, they created a system that relied on that trust. Young women who entered the shop were offered something to drink. The drink was drugged. Once the woman was unconscious or helpless, Mesfewi would kill her. Sometimes the motive was money, but not in the way people usually imagine. These were not elaborate robberies. He often killed for a tiny amount of cash, sometimes almost nothing at all. The violence was not driven by desperation or survival. It was casual, methodical, routine. After the murders, the bodies were mutilated and disposed of nearby. Over time, the number grew. 36 corpses would eventually be discovered, each one a silent testament to how long this went unnoticed. For a long time, no one knew. People disappeared, as they always have. Families searched. Questions were asked. But in a city full of movement and uncertainty, answers were slow to come. What finally broke the pattern was persistence. One set of parents refused to let their daughter vanish without explanation. They traced her movements carefully, step by step, asking questions until all roads pointed to the same place, the shoemaker's shop. Authorities searched the area nearby. What they found could not be ignored. The remains of dozens of women, mutilated and hidden, surfaced from the ground. The horror was undeniable. Mesfewi and Anna were arrested and questioned and tortured. This was not unusual for the time. Confessions were extracted through pain. Truth was believed to come from suffering. Anna did not survive the torture. Her body gave out before the questioning was complete. Mesfewi lived. Eventually, he confessed. He admitted to murdering the women. He did not describe elaborate motives. He did not offer remorse in any meaningful way. He spoke of the killings as facts, events that happened, things he had done. The casual nature of the confession disturbed people almost as much as the crimes themselves. The initial sentence passed down was crucifixion. Even at the time, this was unusual. Crucifixion had largely faded from use, considered too brutal, too symbolic, too extreme. But outrage was strong. The scale of the crimes, the vulnerability of the victims, and the length of time over which the murders occurred pushed the public and the authorities towards something severe. However, Morocco was not acting in isolation. Foreign embassies protested the sentence. Powerful nations exerted pressure. They objected to crucifixion as barbaric, incompatible with modern sensibilities. Morocco, constrained by diplomacy and international politics, could not easily ignore those objections. The sentence was changed. Mesfewi would be beheaded instead. Beheading was more common, more accepted, more orderly. It was swift. It was final. It was, in the eyes of officials, a compromise between justice and international expectation. But Marrakesh did not accept it. The people of the city believed beheading was far too lenient, too quick, too clean. and too merciful for someone who had taken so many lives and shown so little humanity. Anger ran deep. Crowds gathered, demands were made. The sense was clear. Mesfewi should suffer. What they settled on was immurement, being walled up alive. A special cell was constructed within the wall of the bazaar, a public place, a place of trade and daily life. The dimensions were horrifyingly precise, about 2 feet by 2 feet by 6 feet, barely enough space for a human body. Chains were attached to one wall to ensure he would be kept standing. He would not be allowed the mercy of lying down. The location was not chosen by accident. The bazaar was crowded, noisy, full of people. His death would not happen in isolation. It would happen surrounded by life, by voices, by commerce, by the city he had lived among while committing his crimes unnoticed. Mesfewi was not told of his fate immediately. That detail matters. He did not know what was coming. He may have expected beheading. He may have expected something swift. Instead, on the morning of his execution, the truth was revealed. He was led through the streets in chains. Witnesses described him screaming as he was dragged along. Not a composed march to death, but a breakdown, terror spilling out of him in raw, uncontrollable noise. People lined the streets to watch. Some stared silently, others shouted. Some came not out of hatred, but out of grim fascination. When he reached the cell, the reality became undeniable. He was placed inside. Chains were fastened to his body, keeping him upright. Brick by brick, the opening was closed. The sound of mortar and stone filled the air. With each course laid, his screams grew more frantic. When the final brick was placed, the crowd fell silent. That silence did not mean mercy. They waited. When Mesfewi began screaming again from inside the sealed space, the crowd erupted in cheers. This pattern repeated. Silence, screams, cheers, over and over. The city listened to him die. He screamed nearly constantly for 2 days. Imagine that. 2 days of terror, thirst, exhaustion, pain, and despair. No darkness to hide in, no space to collapse, no escape from his own body. Every breath would have scraped his throat. Every movement would have rattled chains. Every hour would have stretched endlessly. On the 3rd day he fell silent. No announcement was made, no formal declaration. The crowd did not gather again in the same way. Silence simply replaced sound. It was understood that he was dead. That was the end, or at least it was the end for him. The story did not end there. It lingered in Marrakesh, passed from mouth to mouth, whispered in the bazaar, retold as a warning. The cell became a place people avoided or stared at or spoke about in hushed voices. Parents warned their daughters. Shoemakers were viewed with suspicion. Trust, once broken so completely, does not return easily. What makes this story especially disturbing is not only the brutality of the crimes or the punishment, but how deeply human everything about it was. There were no supernatural elements, no myths, just people making choices, people trusting the wrong place, people deciding how much suffering was acceptable in the name of justice. Mesfewi's punishment was meant to satisfy outrage, to restore balance, to send a message. Whether it did any of those things is impossible to say. What it certainly did was create another horror, one layered on top of the first. Some argue that he deserved every moment. Others argue that no society should become what it punishes. Both positions have existed since the moment the last brick was laid. The image remains difficult to escape. A man standing in chains, sealed into a wall, screaming while the city listened. 36 women whose voices were taken first. An elderly accomplice who died under torture. A crowd that cheered suffering, and silence finally when it was over. Everything about Haj Mohammed Mesfewi sits at the intersection of crime, justice, fear, and the limits of human cruelty. It is not a story that comforts. It does not offer clean lessons. It simply exists, heavy and unyielding, a reminder that history is often far darker than we want to admit, and that sometimes when people decide to punish monsters, they choose methods that leave scars of their own. I had a guy tell me a story a couple decades ago about how he was hiking in an area in South America and wandered away from other hikers in the area. That's exactly how he started it, almost casually, like he was about to tell me something mildly interesting instead of something that would sit in my mind for years afterward. We weren't in a dramatic setting. No campfire, no spooky atmosphere. Just two people talking the way people do when time opens up a little and old memories drift to the surface. He wasn't the kind of person who exaggerated. That's important. He spoke plainly, carefully, the way someone does when they're describing something that doesn't need embellishment. His tone never rose. He didn't rush. If anything, he slowed down as he got deeper into it, like he was stepping back into a place he didn't visit often. He said he had been hiking with a small group, not a guided tour exactly, but a loose collection of people moving through the same region. The area was lush, green, and deceptive in how calm it looked. Thick vegetation, soft ground, the kind of landscape that feels alive under your feet. It had rained recently and everything smelled like wet earth and plants breaking down into soil. At some point, he wandered off. Not dramatically, not recklessly, just a few steps. He saw something interesting, maybe a different angle, maybe a better view, maybe just wanted a moment alone. He said it happened the way it always does, quietly. 1 minute you're close enough to hear voices, and the next minute you realize they've faded. He wasn't worried. That's another detail that stuck with me. He wasn't scared when he separated from the group. He was experienced, comfortable outdoors. He assumed he could circle back easily. The trail wasn't marked clearly, but the terrain didn't feel hostile. It felt forgiving. That illusion didn't last. He told me the ground was wet in a way that didn't feel dangerous until it was. Not muddy exactly, just soft, springy. He stepped forward and without warning, the earth gave way beneath him. There was no time to react. No slipping, no scrambling, no chance to grab onto something. The ground didn't slide, it collapsed. 1 second he was upright and the next he was gone. He was sucked straight down into a fast-moving underground river. That phrase alone is terrifying, but the way he described it made it worse. It wasn't like falling into a hole and landing in water. It was violent. The water grabbed him immediately, pulling him under, dragging him forward. There was no surface, no air, no light. Pitch black, completely submerged. The current slammed him into the sides of the tunnel as it carried him along, spinning him, twisting him, bouncing him off rock walls he couldn't see. He had no idea which way was up. No sense of direction, just pressure and darkness and motion. He said the noise was overwhelming, even underwater. The roar of water rushing through tight spaces, amplified and distorted, vibrating through his skull. It wasn't just sound, it was force. It felt like being inside a living thing, something that didn't care whether he survived. He told me the thing people always expect him to say at this point is that he panicked. He didn't. That's what made the story even more unsettling. He said there was a brief flash of terror when he realized he was underground, underwater and being carried somewhere unknown. But it didn't turn into panic. It didn't spiral. Something in his mind locked into focus instead. He knew panicking would kill him. That thought came through clearly, almost calmly. If he wasted energy, if he fought blindly, if he inhaled water in a desperate reflex, it would be over. So he didn't fight the current at first. He let it take him, using his arms and legs only to protect his head as best he could from the rock walls. Time stopped making sense. He had no idea how long he was being carried. Seconds stretched into something that felt endless. His lungs burned. His body screamed for air. Every instinct begged him to breathe, but he ignored it as best he could. Eventually, the current slowed, not stopped, just softened. The violent pull eased into something gentler, and suddenly he wasn't being slammed into rock anymore. He realized the tunnel had opened into a larger pocket. It was still pitch black, still underwater, still silent except for the muffled movement of water. He said that moment was almost worse than the initial fall. At least before, the current had direction. Now he was suspended in darkness, running out of air with no idea where to go. This is where most people imagine complete despair. But again, he surprised me. Even as he struggled to hold his breath, even as his chest burned and his muscles started to weaken, his mind stayed clear. He told himself something simple and logical. Water has to go somewhere. That thought became his anchor. An underground river doesn't just stop. It moves. It flows. Which means there had to be another tunnel, another passage, somewhere in that pocket. His job wasn't to fight the water. It was to find where it wanted to go next. So he moved, blindly, feeling along the rock walls with his hands, pushing himself slowly around the submerged chamber. He had no sense of scale. The space could have been the size of a room or the size of a truck. In the darkness, it didn't matter. All that mattered was finding motion. His lungs were screaming now. He said this was the closest he came to losing control. The urge to breathe became overwhelming, almost painful, like his body was tearing itself apart from the inside. Black spots crept into his vision, even though there was nothing to see. And then he felt it. A pull, not strong at first, but noticeable. Water moving with intention, slipping through a narrow opening. He followed it, letting it take his arm, then his shoulder, then his entire body. The current grabbed him again. It pulled him into another tunnel, narrower than the first, faster than he expected. He was spun and dragged, his body scraping against rock, but he didn't care. Movement meant possibility. Movement meant this wasn't the end yet. His lungs were on fire. He told me he was seconds away from inhaling water when something changed. He began to see light. Not brightness, not daylight, just a faint shift, like darkness thinning, the kind of light you notice more by contrast than by shape. It was distant, blurred, but unmistakable. Light meant up. Light meant air. The current carried him until suddenly he was closer, close enough that the rock above him felt thinner. The water shallowed just enough for him to feel resistance above instead of endless space. He punched upward, hard, once, twice. The ground gave way. He broke through the surface, not of water, but of earth. Mud and debris collapsed as he forced himself upward, gasping, choking, sucking in air like it was the first breath he had ever taken. He dragged himself out of the hole on shaking arms, soaking wet, covered in mud, coughing violently as water poured out of his lungs and nose. He lay there for a moment, chest heaving, body trembling uncontrollably. He was alive. When he finally managed to stand, disoriented and exhausted, he realized he was some distance away from where he had started. The terrain looked familiar but wrong, like a rearranged version of the same place. The forest was quieter here. The ground still damp, but solid under his feet now. He stumbled forward and then he saw them, the other hikers, dry, clean, walking along the trail like nothing had happened. They stopped when they saw him. According to him, the looks on their faces were almost funny in hindsight. Confusion first, then concern, then disbelief. Here was a man emerging from the trees, drenched, filthy, shaking, gasping for breath, appearing out of nowhere. They asked what happened. He said he didn't answer right away. He couldn't. His body was still catching up to the fact that he wasn't underwater anymore, that he wasn't in the dark, that he wasn't being carried by something unstoppable. Eventually, he told them, at least the basics. They looked back toward the area where he'd wandered off, suddenly seeing it differently, suddenly aware that the ground beneath their boots wasn't guaranteed to hold, that the landscape they'd trusted could open and swallow someone without warning. Rescue teams were called later. Authorities were notified. The area was examined. They found evidence of underground water channels hidden beneath thin layers of soil and vegetation. A natural trap invisible until it wasn't. He survived with bruises, cuts, and exhaustion. No broken bones, no permanent physical injuries, but he told me something else that stuck even harder. He said the darkness never really left him. Even years later, he sometimes woke up feeling like he couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in. He avoided caves. He avoided places with unstable ground. He avoided the sound of rushing water in enclosed spaces. And yet, he also said something unexpected. He wasn't angry at nature. He wasn't bitter. He said the experience taught him something fundamental about survival, that the human mind, when it stops screaming and starts thinking, it can do incredible things. That calm, even in the face of certain death, can create a path where none seems to exist. But he never hiked alone again, and he never stepped off a trail without thinking twice about what might be underneath his feet. When he finished the story, there was a long silence between us. Not an awkward one, a heavy one. The kind that follows something that doesn't need commentary. I still think about that story, about the idea of being alive one second and swallowed the next, about how close the surface of the world is to things we never see, about how darkness doesn't always come with warning and survival doesn't always come with panic. Most of all, I think about that moment underwater in total darkness, lungs burning, when he chose logic over fear. Water has to go somewhere. It's a simple thought, and it saved his life. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard tonight was real. Real people, real moments, and in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Shadow Archives, because there are more stories waiting, and not all of them end before it's too late.